Good morning, everybody. It is February 8th, 2022. It is 11:31, and this is the Legal and Justice Systems Committee. I'm going to go ahead and start by reading the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across the barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge that what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Thank you. So we're going to be calling this to order, and part of the other business I think I'm going to start with. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to step on a soapbox for just a brief moment to say thank you to everybody, but one person in particular. Several years ago, I had to go to a management conference, and there was an inspirational speaker that spoke about vehicles being compared to people. And he said that some people are like four-wheel drives and they just drive over everybody, but they get the job done. And then he said that there was a sports car, and that person was all about fun, and they brought the party to all the events. There was also an individual that was a Volvo, and that individual had all the statistics. Didn't always get everything done because they were still compiling statistics, but they had all those numbers. And then there was the individual that was the minivan, and that minivan is like the person at the grocery store that's going to let somebody else in front of them, or you're in a lineup and they come in front of that car. And so there's all these different people. And the key to the management on this was to take something from each of these people because you need all of them. And some people are lucky enough to have more than one car in their trade. Lately, I've been feeling like my transmission is slipping to my four-wheel drive, so I need help from everybody. And I want to say the speaker's name was Brian Boyko. I can't remember. He wrote a book. It was awesome. But there's many of those individuals in these meetings and these committees. And I want to thank each and every one of you because you all bring something to this. But the one person that I wanted to recognize, I listened to KGMI the other day, and it's Wendy Jones, and she's going to be next up on the agenda, but she is celebrating 40 years with Whatcom County Sheriff's Office, and Whatcom County has also put a YouTube video on their site. I encourage you guys to look at that, but she is incredible. The strength and tenacity of Miss Jones and what she's brought to the committees and to the Sheriff's Office are incredible. She helped me in a class that I took recently at Western, and I wanted to thank you, Wendy, because I really truly appreciate everything you've done and gone through and where you're at today. So thank you, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Raylene. You're very kind. Anything I can do to help, I'm glad to. So
I really do appreciate you. So to start off the meeting, then we're going to go right into current jail use and restrictions and statistics. And I'm going to let you take it away, Wendy and Caleb, as you can. Thank you.
Certainly, I'm going to try to keep, presentation thing fairly short. That way, if any of you have specific questions, and if I can't either pull it out of my brain or I'm not sure, I might ask, and no, Bruce, I'm not yet, but I also have Caleb there because he also deals with it day to day. I'm assuming all of you have copies of the booking restrictions. If you do not, just let me know when I kind of get done with this section, and I'll send a copy to Jill and ask that she send that out to all of you so you'll have it. Basically, it is restricting the number of people. The municipalities are understandably kind of frustrated because they're having difficulty getting people into jail. But the reality is that the felony offenders all seem to have decided Bellingham and Whatcom County is a good place to live. So we've got a large uptick in that. Jill, this would be the place where if you wanted to put that, the one-page handout that I sent would be great if you could do that. I decided, for me, I'm a visual learner, and so it was, there we go. If you can look at this, it's a breakdown of, this was the number of offenders who were in custody in the Whatcom County Correction System in either the jail or the work center last Friday. So over the weekend, I went down and broke them into different categories. You see a huge difference in the individuals who are pretrial felons and everyone else. And in fact, at that day, and I would argue that it's within a tenth of a point, or that today and has been for months and months, that's 81%, 81.3% of the population of the jail. So what we have are a large number of pretrial felony offenders. The average length of stay for those offenders for last year went from 7 days at the beginning of the year to 18 at the end. Now, there are a whole lot of things that have affected that. COVID has been an overlay because courts have shut down at various times. It's more complicated for attorneys to get in to see their clients, etc. I'm not real clear because I'm neither a public defender or a prosecutor, but I know that there's been some difficulty in getting plea bargains arranged with clients, which is actually how about 90% of our cases for people who are in custody get things resolved. But again, I think COVID has something to do with that. And I do know from a number of years of experience that the closer you get to a trial and the more the inmate thinks, well, dang, I may actually get found guilty of this, they're more willing to talk with everybody about plea agreements. Another factor that comes to play in that is the number of people that are waiting at one point or another for restoration or court hearings, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But the other thing to keep in mind that this graph doesn't show you very well because I couldn't figure out a way of plugging it in the right way, that 52% of the offenders that are represented here have charges in more than one court. So although the main thing holding them in almost every case is that felony offense, they also have charges sometimes in multiple courts, district, all the municipalities, and I've got the breakdown about what that representation is if anybody's interested. And every once in a while we get an anomaly that the felony charge, the bail is $200, but the misdemeanor charge out of one of the municipalities is $20,000. And that can be for a whole variety of reasons. Oftentimes it's around a DUI and for somebody who's a repeat offender. So we are, and then things got worse, what was it, middle of last week, Caleb? I think middle of last week is when the elevators finally said, hey, you know, we need a vacation. And so they basically quit working, and so far, knock on wood, they've been sort of working at least for the past several days. So we've been able to move people up and down and get them where they needed to go. It is another challenge, and it's, you know, problems with a jail that's not designed for today's criminal justice population and is just old. And since I actually predate this jail, I understand its feelings. So that's kind of it as an overview. I'm not sure how specific y'all wanted me to get. If you've got specific questions, now would be the time to ask them, and I'll do my best. And if I can't, I can get the answers to you through Jill. So I guess if you want to stick your hand up, and I'm seeing Jackie.
Oh, yeah, when you probably said, and I was typing some stuff out, but who is it that makes up that 204 pretrial felon group?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Can you define some, is it DUIs? Is it who makes up that 204 pretrial felon group?
People who have been arrested on a felony charge that could get them to go to prison. And I mean, there's a whole big long list. And if you want that, Jackie, I can get that for you. Okay. A DUI, for the most part, a DUI is a misdemeanor offense. But if they've got like 4 or 5, either Eric or Maya would probably know the number off the top of their head. they can get bumped into the felony side, or what started as a DUI then becomes a vehicular assault or vehicular homicide because they get into an accident. It's a more serious offense that if you are found guilty, you may go to prison versus staying and doing your jail time.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just trying to get a sense of what types of crimes are in that pretrial felony section. And so maybe I could talk with you offline and get a better sense of that if nobody else is interested. But the other question I had was, we had some discussion last week, and Darlene thinks my information might be a little dated. So basically I had made the statement that a lot of the folks in jail are often in crisis, some sort of behavioral health crisis. And so the acuity level is quite high. And I think I also made a statement about research that indicates that a lot of them have acquired brain injuries. And so my thinking, and I was trying to distinguish between the prison population and the jail population. And I think Darlene's point was, well, I think we have a much more prison-like population now than we ever had before. And I could be misstating, Raylene, what you were trying to communicate. But so I guess I'm trying to get a sense now of what that level of acuity is like. We might have fewer people in jail, oftentimes I've heard, but the acuity in behavioral health issues, the level of crisis, suicidality, all of that sort of stuff goes up, that there's more of that. So could you speak to that at all?
We definitely have people who are behaving in a way that is more acute than we've probably seen in my professional career. There's a variety of reasons for that, including that the court system, mainly because we're making requests of both prosecutor and the judges to try and release people out of custody as soon as they can, because I need room for higher level of offenders. We have more people in custody right now on homicide charges than we've ever seen. The levels of high level assaults and crimes of violence are much higher than in my professional career. So that part is there. There is an underlying, a lot of them have drug and alcohol problems. A lot of folks have what would come as personality disorder offenses, which gets a little sticky for corrections facilities, because for us, people that are exhibiting symptoms of personality disorders are simply offenders. That if you don't fall in the SMI category, schizophrenic, bipolar disorders, deep depression, then, I mean, one of the diagnostic criteria for a lot of the personality disorders, like antisocial, narcissistic, I'd go on, but it wastes time anyway, are that you're incarcerated. And so these are folks, some of them don't recognize the laws as applying to them. Some of them know the law is supposed to, they just don't care. And the other complicating factor with folks who fall in access to personality disorders is that, especially if they've been in the correction system or in the criminal justice system, there aren't very effective treatments for it to make it stick. So for us, the ones that when we're looking at folks who are mentally ill, it's folks who fall in that access one category. I think they're still using that as a designation. And those are folks who truly frequently don't understand, at least at the time that they're coming into custody, exactly what's going on. So Raylene, I think you had your hand up next.
Thank you. And Jackie actually asked some of the same questions, so that's great. But I wanted to clarify two things. One is, from what I'm seeing and from what you're saying, is that on the pretrial felonies, that most of those are more person felonies, where they're crimes against a person rather than crimes against property. And the property crimes, to my understanding, unless there's several of them building up, they're more likely to be released due to the current restrictions.
Yes, and that has been, like I said, the assistant with the prosecutor's office it's more difficult for the cops on the street and for all of the municipalities because the folks go right back to what they were doing before they were arrested. So, and I appreciate that. My problem is I just don't have enough room for everybody.
And then the second question, and I don't know if you have this data, is how many of those that are pretrial felonies are either waiting for a competency eval or a restoration, or they've been restored and now they're back in the facility and they're waiting for trial yet after that?
I'd like to talk about that a little bit later because I'm looking at the agenda and I really wanted to focus on kind of more global, just the population at the jail. And then I know that there's another, oh, reentry specialist is next, and then we'll come back and talk about that. But I've got some information that I think will be helpful to give people an idea about it. I just don't want to co-opt somebody else's time.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Gockley.
Thanks, Wendy, for this information. Maybe this is what you were saying before and I just didn't understand it, but I'm interested in how formally you're able to assess the behavioral health status of people in the jail so that other than an eyeball from a correctional officer or behavioral observations or whatever, it probably makes a difference, you know, how professionally that evaluation and that categorization is done. And I'm just wondering what the practice is in day-to-day operations of the jail.
The jail has 2 full-time mental health professionals, licensed mental health professionals, and we have a psychiatric nurse practitioner now. What happens is the MHPs are here for now, thanks in large part to some help with Jackie Mitchell and in getting a new contract settled, so that we've got the MHPs here 7 days a week. And for anyone, they go over the roster of everyone who's coming in. The corrections deputies are actually very well trained in identifying people that are acting differently, and we'll flag them. We go through, all right, so when anybody's coming in, we have a series of questions we ask them. A lot of times people are not willing to answer any of them, which is fine, but there's also spots for the corrections deputy to write down their observations. So there are questions that they see. Is this individual here confused? Are they aware where they're at? Are they having problems standing up? You know, some things that would be indicators somebody's having some type of problems. If it's during regular working hours, then we can get one of the nurses to come down and also do another check. Otherwise, there's an automatic referral to the MHPs. And they go through the roster of all new bookings to see if they recognize anybody's name or are aware of them through other parts. At that point, the MHP, it's usually within 24 hours, except for extraordinary circumstances, will have made contact with that individual and started doing an assessment. Sometimes it's, yeah, this person's mentally ill. We're going to see, do they need medications? Do they have a local provider? All of those type of things. I had a conversation with our MHP yesterday about an individual, and she said, well, he was able to talk to me. He knows why he's here. He finds it interesting, but she said, I really feel he's also responding to internal stimuli. So she had picked up that he was hearing voices. And so that was the next step. And we can reach out to family and ask if they can provide us information. We can oftentimes not provide it to them, but what we found is that they're really willing to share. These are what we've been seeing. A lot of times what we hear was this individual was very smart in high school and did really well in college, and then all of a sudden they've changed. And you see that pattern, especially with folks who are schizophrenic. So what will then happen is the MHPs will get with our ARMP and say, can we see about getting this person either continued on the meds that they should have been on and are now compliant, or get started on some medications, and so they'll start that process. The difficulty we have in the jail is that while we can try to persuade people to take medication, we cannot force it. And we have individuals that we're well aware could be more functional when they were here if they would take meds, but they're adamant about not wanting to do it. Sometimes it's because that's a symptom of their illness, but there are a lot of people who don't want to take medications they know that they probably should. It's one of the reasons why folks have strokes, because they don't take their blood pressure meds. But so it's actually at a pretty high level. And then, well, I'll talk more about some of the kinks in the process in a little bit, but then there are some other things that we can do if that involves the rest of the criminal justice system about getting them to the hospital. The one other part of this is if the MHPs let the sergeant or myself or Lieutenant Erickson know, we will get the DCRs, designated crisis responders, down to do an evaluation to see whether they are detainable under the civil mental health law. We cannot take somebody up and they will not admit to the psych unit unless they're released from custody because of a lot of different things, but one of them is that they don't want uniformed law enforcement officers on the unit. Because if you've got folks who are mentally fragile, having, you know, big person there with a gun in their hip doesn't work really well for a therapeutic environment. The DCRs 99.9% of the time work very closely. And when the MHPs have reached out and said, this is what I'm seeing, they're really good about coming down to the jail. And then the courts, the prosecutors and the public defender are all very collaborative with us about getting somebody up to One Central or any of the other ENTs that will take them and get them stabilized. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's incredibly informative and actually quite encouraging, the level of insight and the different angles you come at the situation in. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to add something to what Wendy said because, and I think this is no small part due to Wendy's work, that we have been able to arrange to get civil commitments and medication through the hospital, get the DCRs to come in and then get those civil commitments taken care of, and people in the hospital and medicated, and then they come back to the jail because for years there was no other jail that was able to do this. Nobody could get the DCRs to come to their jails. And they often would, the agency would often fight us about having to do it here because they didn't do it anywhere else. So it was really quite a feat to kind of keep that piece of it going. And there were periods where it disappeared and we had to bring it back. But Wendy was really instrumental in that as well.
She's very tactful, and I'm not going to explain to you how I was able to do that. So anyway, any other questions about this part? You'll get another shot here in a little bit, but okay. Then I'm going to turn it on to reentry. Turn it over, not on.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I don't know how I raised my hand on myself. I'm learning all kinds of buttons here. Jackie, I think if I could get you to give us a little bit of an update on the reentry services. I know that some of this is actually going to fall under the joint meeting, but I'm hoping you can give us a little bit. And some of the information that I have, I would like to bring in kind of as a combination with the competency and reentry. So Jackie, if you can start us off.
Find my button. Oh, I'm already on. I didn't realize I was still speaking. Yes. So let me just step back for just a second because the MHPs that Wendy was talking about are on a contract with Lifeline Connections, and they are providing a team of mental health professionals to work both inside the jail, in reentry, and also over at juvenile detention and juvenile probation. So Julie Grendon, who's the regional director of community services, is also the person spearheading this contract now for Lifeline. And she's done just a great job of going in and shadowing and learning all about the jail because it was, you know, something they hadn't really done to this level. And of course, what we've done is tried to craft a team of people so we get coverage where we need it and where it's most important to have it. The jail, for example, has so much crisis, so much suicidality. We're constantly doing behavioral health assessments and suicide risk assessments that we often need to have coverage there and pull it from somewhere else. And so that's what has happened sometimes to reentry. But with this team that we have now, we have 2 MHPs in the jail. We have a reentry person who has already started, and she is working, I think, half-time, will soon to be extracted from the rest of her other duties and brought in full-time. I believe that happens by the end of March. And then the other 2 positions on the team that we still need to fill are a supervisor and a juvenile detention person, but we've just had to take it step by step and figure out each piece and try to stand up each piece as we can go. But it's looking good. It's looking like we're going to have most of our positions filled. I think the juvenile detention, probation, behavioral health specialists could be a little tougher than some of the others. There just aren't a lot of people that work with kids that are out there looking for jobs right now. So I guess that would be my update. Go ahead, Arlene, you had a question? Oh, I can't hear you, sorry.
Sorry. My question is about the range of services that those providers actually provide. Because from what we've heard so far, people who have come to our committees to report, the range is very vast of what is needed for people to be restored and to re-enter in an effective way. So I'm just curious about what they are actually doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not really speaking about competency right now in and of itself, but just speaking about the acute mental health needs of the folks in the jail. So depending on the staffing, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. We are able to definitely do a lot of crisis services. That's really clear. There's a little bit of short-term brief therapy or counseling. So they might meet with somebody anywhere from 1 to 5 times to try to get them to the next step of the process. For people with SUDs, it's light touch, and there's usually a handoff to an outpatient provider, typically a jail. We have somebody come in and do jail assessments, who then does coordination of treatment, conducts coordination of treatment types of services for that person. The reentry person, when there's, even though there's not a lot of treatment that can take place in the jail due to lack of space and lack of confidential space in particular, when they're stable, well, I guess I can't even really say that, but when they're upon release, they would be handed over to the reentry person, and the reentry person can follow them for up to 90 days or until they're connected with another service. So that's our hope, is to get them connected to another service, because we know we're going to need space for other people coming out of the jail. But the nice thing I will say about having Lifeline Connections involved in this process is that you remember the reentry list I sent you, reentry inventory I sent and to the last meeting, detailed some of the services that Lifeline is already providing. And so they have peers coming into the jail to work and actually conduct some of those warm handoffs and walk people out of the jail when they're released to some of the services. They have just a couple other programs where they can send people in as well. So yeah, so I think we're in better shape than we've been in a while, especially if we can find staff and get fully staffed, and a supervisor will be critical for that, so that Julie can get back to orchestrating the empire of outreach, connectivity, and reentry stuff, and somebody else can kind of keep a watchful eye over things in the jail itself. So, and with the team. So any other questions? Oh, Raylene?
Thank you, Jackie. So 2 questions. One is, do you think once everybody is fully staffed that that's going to be adequate for the needs, or do you think we're going to need more assistance and an additional navigator? I know a lot of the stuff that you work on is crisis and behavioral health related, but we also have a small population of individuals that could go into crisis because of their incarceration that may not be getting the reentry assistance. So that's the first part. The second part is, when we do get the juvenile assistance for reentry, when the juvenile turns 18, are they going to be followed? Because we have a lot of them that are in between. They're waiting to see what's going to happen, and then they turn 18, and sometimes they get pushed back to the felony world as an adult.
So I'm going to answer your second question first. We don't really have a cutoff for juvenile, so or youth on probation. It's a good question. And so when they turn 18, a question I have to you is, do they go to adult probation at that point if they're still on probation, or what happens? Anybody know the answer to that?
So what are you talking about? Folks that have started on juvenile, they're on juvenile probation, and then they turn 18 during the course of that specific probation for that particular offense, or a new offense after they've turned 18?
And Bruce, I've seen a couple different things that happen with juveniles. I've seen that they've got cases pending as a juvenile, and then somewhere in that case, the prosecutor's office determines that, okay, they're no longer a juvenile. We can go ahead and process this as a felony or as a misdemeanor. It's going to now get kicked back to a different court. If it's a felony, it's still staying in Superior Court. But I guess what I see is we've got a reentry specialist that's going to be assisting the juveniles. And then are they going to still be assisting them when they turn 18? And from what Jackie said, they don't have a cutoff. I mean, I just don't know where are these people going, and I don't want them to get lost when they have a birthday.
Yeah, for us, there's not really a specific cutoff. I mean, I think we would be taking it situation by situation. And if a person still needs our services, we would probably still be providing services to them, trying to connect them. And once they're engaged in services, our hope would be to extract ourselves and reach out to the other people in need, kind of thing. So, but especially if there's a specific case, we could certainly talk about that. And then going back, Raylene, sorry, to your first question, because I've lost it now that I answered the second question first, to be honest.
That's okay. Sometimes I lose my questions as we go into the second one. So I think I was just wondering if there was going to be enough, once we get everybody on board for these programs, do you think that's going to be adequate, or are we going to need more?
It's hard to say. My immediate reaction is there's always a need for more. How much more? I'm not sure. I think if I were to have a really complete full team, I would probably put 1 or 2 SUDPs on the team, because we have heard data anywhere from 60 to 80% of people in the jail have some SUD issue. And we certainly see a lot of recycling of folks with SUD issues. So it would be my hope, I guess, that we could be a part of really attaching ourselves to the medication for opioid use disorder program that Wendy has going in the jail, and help get people attached, walk them over to one of the MAT programs in town, medication assisted treatment programs in town, and that we would be able to So yeah, I would say there's a need for more reentry for sure. And how much more is kind of the question, is probably where I'd go. But I would guess at least 2 more SUDPs or a case manager and an SUDP, or possibly a peer might be helpful.
Thank you, Jackie. Does anybody else have any other questions for Jackie at this time? All right, I think we're going to jump into competency and restoration. And Jackie, I'm going to put you on the spot, so my apologies, but I think Wendy will be able to help me out as well, because we had a brief discussion about Cell and Harper, and I had a meeting briefly with Susan Copeland and Dr. Nygaard with the DSHS restoration, and they're very interested in assisting. They want to be involved. They're going to be able to participate at the joint meeting. And I think they wanted to also be involved in reentry and assist with individuals that are waiting for restoration or that have been restored. And so they have lots of questions. And I'm putting you on the spot, Jackie, because I want to know if you'll be able to assist in that. And if I can put you in touch with them before the next behavioral health meeting, and information you can have on it. I wasn't as familiar with Cell versus the US as well as the Harper decision until I recently spoke with Wendy. So she might want to chime in and give us a brief synopsis on that with involuntary medication as well, because I'm guessing I'm not the only one that doesn't know what all of these things are.
So Raylene, your question to me is, can I participate with these 2 folks and in some kind of conversation about reentry at the next meeting? Is that okay? Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'm actually handing over the competency piece to Wendy. I sent her the information, and I thought she would have, if we're moving to that piece, I thought she would have the best information about if this bill represented an improvement or not, and what its potential impacts or lack of impacts are. And I could add my own bullet points afterwards, perhaps.
Okay, let me give you kind of status of where we are right now. We currently have 17 people down at Western State Hospital in the process of going through competency, a restoration for competency. Now, one of the things, all the folks who work in the legal system know they have this down pretty well. Sometimes people who don't have a day-to-day interaction with it are not as clear. It is important that people understand that folks will come back from Western State legally competent, but still very mentally ill. And it is always something, and it took me a couple of years for me to figure out that competency and insanity are legal terms, they are not medical terms. And so that it is not unusual that somebody who's been found competent, has gone through, has been found guilty, and either is in jail or is in prison, is very, very mentally ill, but is legally competent and legally sane. And that, like I said, it took me a couple of years when I was getting into the profession to figure that out. So one of the issues that we run into is that when people come back from competency, they are on medication. We have always taken the medication that the hospital has given them, and it gets continued while they're here, as long as folks will take it. The biggest problem we run into is quite rapidly folks will decide they don't want to anymore. And then what happens is we fall under, Raylene referred to it as the Harper decision. It's a decision that came out of a Supreme Court decision. I don't have the date. I thought I did. Anyway, 1990. And it actually originated in the state of Washington with the Department of Corrections. And there's a very high set of procedures you have to be able to follow in order to involuntarily medicate somebody while they are in custody. That actually is heightened if you have somebody who is still pretrial. So what both defense and prosecution and the court is left with dealing with is that we'll bring people back, they are competent, and then they go off their medications, and it's a race to see whether you can get somebody into court, the case settled before they decompensate and need to go back to the hospital. And if they have to go back to the hospital, that means they go to the bottom of the list and they got to work their way up. Right now, I have 9 people waiting. On average, it looks like most of them have been on the list since the first part of November. I have one of the people on the list who has been down to Western State 8 times since they first appeared on our radar. This was a gentleman who was first arrested in May of 2019. He was down several times on that offense, and somebody bailed him out. And within, let's see, he got bailed out on 1/8 of 21, and he was rearrested on new, fairly significant felony charges on 4/19 of 21. And so didn't do real well in the community, and has been down to Western once and is on the list to go back because he's adamant about the fact that he's not mentally ill and he doesn't need to take any of these medications. So part of the problem, and this is one of the contributing factors for the number of pretrial felons, and it's not for lack of trying with the system, but if you looked at or if you walked somebody through the process in getting in and out of Western State and getting their case dispositioned, first they come into the jail, they have to be identified as having a mental illness. I'm still trying to work out with the civil legal folks if I can just pick up the phone, or we can put a designator on the booking reports that go out to the criminal justice system, that this is an individual who has a mental illness. We can do that for people. In fact, we have to do it for people who are deaf, need assistance for hearing. But mental illness is a whole different kettle of fish. So sometimes it may take either a few hours, a few days, or a few weeks before public defender is aware that their client is mentally ill. And that's been a little more complicated with COVID, and certainly more complicated recently with the elevators. So then the public defender has to go before the court and ask for an order in order to get somebody an evaluation. Now, the system, the criminal mental health system has gotten much better at doing those evaluations within the 7-day statutory requirement, and that's good. Except that after the evaluation's done, the report has to be written, then it has to be sent into the court, and then it has to be noted up to get before the court as far as a motion, and then the judge needs to decide whether or not, okay, this person appears that they are not competent based on this report, and another motion comes forward to send them for competency restoration. So that comes in, and then they go on the list to go to Western or Eastern State Hospital, because one of the things the state has done is they've closed Maple Lane, they've closed the Yakima Center, so we're back to 2 hospitals again. Once they get down there, again, like I mentioned before, they will, oftentimes the prosecution and public defender are working together to see if they can't smooth things out. So basically the restoration order will have the information so that the hospital can involuntarily medicate them. That's called the SELL decision, S-E-L-L, comes out of a legal case. So they originally, most of the time, go for 45 days. Sometimes that gets extended. And again, the systems have been trying to make that more efficient so they don't have them transported up here where they sit for a while till they can get before the court and get a 90-day order. So they're trying to mesh that and do it electronically if at all possible. So the person comes back, hopefully they've been deemed competent. They come here, we have the medication orders, we get that filled right away and start offering them medication. And now what happens is the decision from the competency restoration folks has to be written up. That can take some time. And then it comes to the court, and that gets noted in, and then they have to ask to get on the calendar to get a motion to have that accepted or not. There is not infrequently some disagreement between the defense side and the prosecution side. If there are any delays, for whatever reason, and they frequently happen, things get continued. And so it may take a while between the time that that report actually appears to the court and the time arguments are made in front of the judge about competency. In that period of time, which can be anywhere from a week to several months, you've got somebody sitting in jail who should be on meds, is refusing to take them, and so is starting to spiral down into his or her illness again. And then we get to start the whole program all over again. And it is inefficient, it is ineffective, it is very frustrating for everybody involved. So this is not one person's fault or one entity's fault. This is a system that is very clunky. It's not very effective. And I wish I had a good solution for you. Western, I know, is very interested in trying to smooth that out. I have some grave concerns, however, for some things that are on the horizon. One of them is the bill that Jackie referred to, and it came out of Ways and Means yesterday and has now gone over to the Rules Committee. And it's actually Senate Substitution Bill 5664. I read it and didn't understand most of it. Now, granted, I'm not either a lawyer or a legislator or a doctor, but I've been dealing with this stuff for a long time. And I did get a hold of a public health doc I know down at the University of Washington who works with law enforcement a lot, and asked him to take a look at it. And he emailed me back. He said, I cannot believe that this piece of legislation actually got out of committee. It is confusing. It is unrealistic. Anyway, but those are my opinions, and actually my physician friend too. One of the other big hitch in the giddy up here is that what a lot of people don't realize is that places, whether it's the stabilization center, whether it's the hospital, whether it's the evaluation and treatment facility down in Mukilteo, do not have to take anyone into their facility if they can articulate a concern that this individual might be dangerous to their other patients. So what we find is that the folks who are at the height of whatever their behavioral health issue is, and it can be like a combination of methamphetamine and schizophrenia, which is never a good thing, they're acting out in a very violent way. It is very clear to everybody who has come into contact with them that they are significantly mentally ill and need to be in involuntary treatment. And nobody in the entire state of Washington will touch them with a 10-foot pole because they are afraid of them. And so what happens is they come to jail. And this very long, very cumbersome system happens, and they don't get any better when they're here unless we hit them at just the right time and we're able to talk them into taking the medication. It's very frustrating for all of us in the system. Arlene, you had your hand up. I'll quit preaching. Try to answer questions. You got to hit your mute. There you go.
I so appreciate your description in so much detail. It's very, very helpful. But because we're charged, that was my cat, because we're charged with making recommendations for change, I guess I'm curious to know if you had the power. Now I'm speaking in a theoretical way, right? If you had the power to alter and make a better system, and you could do, 3 or 4 changes, what would you recommend? Because that's what we want to go from, is from hope. We would like to have hope. This is pretty dark, what you're describing. And I appreciate that you've worked within the system the best way that you could, and that's a really hard thing to do when you want better for people. And but what would that be, do you think?
Well, I actually don't think I've got a magic wand that's that big. I would refer back to what I was looking at the minutes from your last meeting, and Maya actually had made the comment that the fixes that need to happen are not going to happen here. The fixes that need to happen have to happen at the state level.
Okay,
And those would be, one is going to be at some point, and I don't know if Maya is going to appreciate this point of view or not, but one of the things that society needs to look at is that there are going to be individuals in our communities who will be non-compliant, don't respond well to medication, and who are so dangerous, they most probably should never be outside of a forensic hospital type of a place. Those were, I mean, there were horrendous stories that came out of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s about state psych hospitals that were horrific. Western was one of them. And that led to a lot of changes that absolutely needed to happen. But there is now starting to be a recognition in the forensic psychiatry field that simply telling people go back to your community and you'll be fine is simply
yeah.
not working and hasn't been for quite a while.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you would find if you looked at the number is for every psych bed that was lost along the way, the number of people that are incarcerated increases, because the jails and the prisons have become the de facto places to put people who are like that.
So you're really talking about a major revolution in psychiatric positions, which occurred a long time ago and needs to be revised and re-examined, which is my opinion also. Having worked over 40 years in this profession, I understand that what you're saying is true, and that it is possible to forcibly hospitalize people in a humane way. It is possible to do that. We're not there yet, and that will require a big nationwide discussion and professional discussion, I'm sure. So I appreciate what you're saying there, but it has also to do with having a good hospital system, which we currently do not have. In other words, we don't have enough beds. We don't have enough treatment available for people who are severely mentally ill and delayed treatment. So, you know, there's that. I appreciate that. Anything else that you think would be really important?
Well, I think it looks like we got a couple other questions, so I want Jackie and then come to Maya.
Okay.
But the other thing, Arlene, I'd ask you to remember is that you don't build new beds. It has to be a way of requiring, I guess, psychiatric facilities to take people that are scary. So anyway, Jackie, it was you, and then Maya.
Yeah, hold on one sec. So that was a really good question you asked, Arlene, and I was trying to think myself, and I would need more time to really think about that, I think, because my initial hit with competence, and I have both personal and professional experience with it, not that I personally was found incompetent or anything like that, but I have both personal and professional experience with this issue, and everything Wendy describes is completely accurate. By the very fact of the situation that a person ends up in the competency process usually tells you this person has been untreatable, was unable to be treated in other situations. They were unable to follow through. They were with case management, with taking medications, and they have a condition called, and it's always hard to pronounce, but it's anosognosia, which is not the same as denial, in which a person has a little bit of self-awareness. It's really a complete lack of awareness that they have an illness. And people who undergo competency often can become so frightened. In the case of my family, it was a person who had both paranoid personality disorder, which Wendy just described eloquently as something that is untreatable, but also paranoid schizophrenia. So you have a person who, from the get-go, didn't see their illness, couldn't develop any awareness around it, and got sicker and sicker and sicker to the point where people's lives were threatened, including his own. And by that, I mean, one family member sleeping in bed, fully clothed with car keys in hand, ready to jump out the window if she had to. So, and finally had to commit a crime to get any kind of help. And that was the competency process. And by a stroke of luck, and I know this sounds really weird, but by a stroke of luck, this family member ended up with multiple sclerosis and couldn't walk. And my vision of him, had he been able to walk, was that he would have escaped the institution. He would have gotten out, he would have come back, and we would have been going through this cycle over and over and over and over, like so many families have. So this is not only detrimental to the person themselves who decompensate further, but it's detrimental to the entire family, and the little girl that this person tried to imprison could have been seriously hurt as well. So it's impactful to more than just that single individual, I guess, is a point I wanted to make. And I also want to make the point that I think this probably can't really be resolved without institutionalization until there's a point at which we have better medications or some way of getting in and fixing the brain process, because it is completely a brain disease. And it's in many cases, it ends up with somebody who simply can't be treated with what we know now. So that's my thought.
Maya?
I also did want to say, I don't mean to be a negative Nelly or whatever, because I do believe a lot of people can be helped. And I'm often a supporter of trying to get people out and get people the help that they need. It's just that this is not one of those cases typically where that can happen.
Sorry, Jackie. And so Maya, I know you were, there you are.
So, outpatient restoration services where people could be released from the jail and receive restoration services in the community. And Wendy described the system as clunky, and I don't totally disagree with that, but I think what makes it clunky is just the fact that Western doesn't take people in a timely fashion. So we know after the evaluation, after 7 to 10 days, if the person's competent or not, it's that they then wait for 3 months before they go somewhere where they decompensate further, and then it takes them longer to come out of it. So having those beds, as the True Blood decision requires, as we all know is necessary, is the second prong. And the third is having, I guess, to some extent, prosecutors that are willing to dismiss cases, that criminal matters, and send them to civil commitment when it's clear that there's just that these are mental health related, and that there is just this churning back and forth of like, restore to competency and immediately decompensate, restore to competency, immediately decompensate, that there has to be some willingness to say, we're going to let go of this criminal offense and just put them into a civil commitment proceeding. So those are the three things I think would actually help. And then there's more, I'm sure, but.
Yeah. Caleb.
Thanks, Chief. I had sort of a comment and or a question. Actually, I think it's just going to be more a comment. So first, I know that this is not what the chief is saying, but I wanted to clarify, we don't put people into our institutions for being mentally ill. It is a result of some criminal activity that ultimately the community is going, we don't know what to do. And the only place that has a no turn away policy is the jail. So that's where a lot of people end up. If you ask me, this is just the world according to Caleb, in my opinion only. If we were able to change things magic wand wise, I would look to a different institution than what we're currently dealing with to help, with bed space, with recognizing mental illness, dealing with the real issues. If we were to say, hey, we're going to deal with the community problem the way it is today and the way current constructs are, I think we have to recognize that the institution that we have, the jail structure, isn't working. It's not helping anybody by design, by definition almost. It's contributing to the problems that people already have existing, because no natural light or lack of natural light, being constantly alone and segregated from other populations simply because of their difficulty interacting with others. Staffing levels have to change. A recognition of the training level for the staffing has to change, because if this is what we're dealt and we have to do this for the indefinite future, and we're looking for even just steps to take to improve this process, we really have to say, let's deal with it right here the way it is and take some steps to increase training for our staff, recognize that housing in and of itself is causing the problem, and we have to design a facility that doesn't have those issues.
And I would agree 100% with everything Caleb is saying. The last thing I want to say, because I know that y'all probably have about 14 other things to do in the next hour. One of the things that I would ask that you take, well, it's probably going to take about 45 minutes to read through the Senate bill, because one of the things you will find is that if the system is using outpatient restoration and an individual is not doing what the judge has told them that they have to do on the court order, that we may very well be in a situation where law enforcement will be sent to pick up that individual and bring them into custody because they are not cooperating with the outpatient restoration. So in other words, they've been found incompetent. They're supposed to be working towards competency, and now law enforcement is going to be expected to go get them and bring them to jail where they weren't probably competent to be in the first place. And I did have somebody who's got more experience in reading legislation than I am, always said, yeah, that's what it says. So that's one of the hangups for us, because if we're bringing someone into custody, we want it to be because they've broken a law in the state of Washington. And violating a court order is breaking a law, but simply coming back into custody simply because you're mentally ill, I don't think is a good step that we want to take. So I'm going to quit talking. I appreciate all of your attention. If any of you have any questions, or if there's any material I've mentioned that you want copies, please feel free to give me an email and I'll make sure that it either comes to you directly or through Jill. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. I really appreciate all the input that you've provided to us today. It's been very helpful and beneficial. We are going to be continuing competency and restoration discussions at our next meeting. So we'd encourage everybody to review that Senate bill prior to that meeting. I also believe we're going to most likely have Dr. Nygaard, Susan Copeland, and most likely Darlene Dawson or Tom Kinlan participating in the next joint meeting to continue discussions and what they foresee as assistance that they think might be beneficial for trying to make the system less clunky. I don't know if we're ever gonna fix all the problems in the world, but we're trying to make it a little bit better, and we working with the people that do some of this, I think will be beneficial. Jill mentioned that we needed to discuss a little bit on the March meeting as a joint, but we are running out of time. So I'm just going to let you know that we're going to be discussing the competency restoration, reentry services, and then current use and data on the crisis stabilization center, the items we currently have. It's probably going to be a pretty full agenda, but if anybody has any other input, please let myself or Arlene know on things that you would like to see at that next joint meeting. The other item on the agenda that didn't get discussed is meeting length, because we keep running out of time. And I understand and appreciate everybody that is here, as I know that everybody's crunched for time, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to go to a shorter meeting time, but it does seem like we're running out of time at every meeting. So it will be on the next Legal and Justice Committee meeting as the first item on the agenda. And I will try not to step on my soapbox on this part of it, so that we can address that and determine what the needs are for legal and justice, and whether we need to go past an hour. Is there any other business that anybody has? Okay, seeing none, do we have any public comment?
Thank you. We have 5 people attending the meeting right now. If any of you would like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hand now. And no attendees' hands are raised. Maya?
Sorry to jump on at the last minute. I have planned to be at the next meeting, but I want to make sure I'm here for the discussion of extending these. I really don't want them to be longer. And I have many of these meetings that go over the lunch hour, and I just think that it's not a good thing to set up for folks. I don't think so. I feel pretty opposed to lengthening it, and I would really like to see them moved out of the lunch hour, because I don't think it's really humane to people to expect them to work for 9 hours in a row, and that's what happens. So thanks.
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate that. And I'm sure we'll discuss that at the next meeting. And it might be just shortening our agendas so that we can make sure we have enough time to discuss that. But it is definitely something we do need to discuss in the future meeting. So I appreciate that. Any other business or public comment? We've done that. I think we're ready to go. I don't see any other hands. Please let me know before I adjourn. Sheriff Alpha.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Maya. We all have busy schedules, and while this work is important, we're all probably members of a half a dozen other committees, and we're finding we're spending 25% of our work attending meetings rather than getting the job done. So I just, if I'm not at the next meeting, I don't think I will be at the full Law and Justice because of another conflict with another meeting. I just like that comment to be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Alpha. I appreciate your input. Any other comments? All right, I appreciate everybody, and we'll see you at the next joint meeting in March, and we're adjourned. Thank you.